Hello and welcome to Stories and Lessons. This is Tim Winneke with Empowered Change Counseling and Education. And in today's episode, I'm going to tell you a story that goes back to my service overseas, what got me involved in fighting for survivors of sexual trauma, and how the anger I used to get involved ended up betraying that cause. At this point in my life, I was 30 years old, and I was at my first duty station in Korea. And I was really excited at this point. For the intel specialty I had, it was a year of training, and the military is all based around purpose, that our work matters. And the problem is after being in training for so long, with never actually having contributed to a mission, you start to really just feel lacking, like your uniform isn't real. And I was really excited to finally get to the point where I was contributing. So I show up, and the way that the Air Force does your first base experience is you've got about a 2-week introductory period where you leave your unit and there's a whole slew of people that come in and talk to you about what it's going to mean now that you're out of training, what services are around the base and how to access them. And all in all, it's kind of a welcome process to the real force. And one of the people that came by was the assistant for the sexual assault response coordinator. And the woman came in the room, and it was me and about 30 other people that were new to the base, mostly security forces guys, which is the Air Force's version of military police. And the woman comes up to the front and she starts giving the PowerPoint, which at the time was just a list of slides telling you that rape is bad and you shouldn't do it, and if you do, it'll end your career. We've figured out by now that that's a really poor way to do prevention work. And the woman's up there and she's doing the PowerPoint, and she's just, you can tell she's done this PowerPoint 100 times, and that she's not even cognizant of what the words are anymore, right? Her head's probably somewhere else. And she's about 5 minutes into a 20 or 30 minute presentation. And I think we're all starting to check out at this point because all of us have seen this briefing once a month, because that's generally what the Air Force and the military does. Is whenever there's a problem, they make a PowerPoint, they make it mandatory, and then they make everybody take it and listen to that PowerPoint as many times as they can. And the bigger the problem, the more the PowerPoint appears into the weekly trainings. So I'm starting to check out and zone out of this training. And then all of a sudden, this young guy, maybe he was 19, raises his hand and says, "Ma'am, not for nothing, but I'm a police officer and I literally see this training once a week. Is there any way we can have a different discussion about this?" And, you know, he was a bit brazen and was probably out of his lane. I mean, he's a brand new airman. The woman in the front of the room is a sergeant. And I was a little stunned that this had happened, just because it kind of broke me out of my daydream toning out this PowerPoint. And all of a sudden, the woman giving the training gets furious. I had not seen anyone in the military as angry as this woman was, and that's saying a lot. And she points her finger at the young man and says, "If you'd stop fucking raping people, I could stop giving this damn briefing. Now sit down and shut up." And the whole room went cold, absolutely silent. We were all brand new airmen, so this was a sergeant yelling at us, so we do the immediate thing of just locking up and sitting still. And about 30 seconds after that, I was livid. You know, first I was stunned that that exchange had happened, but then I was very angry. The woman just effectively called every man in the room a rapist. And I'm in that room. I'm a guy, and I'd never done that and absolutely hated men who do. But I'm trained to sit down and shut up when I'm told to, right? That's part of the military. That's a sergeant. I'm an airman. And about 2 minutes into what's left of her briefing, I calm down and I take a look at this woman. And her uniform is kind of a mess. Her hair isn't done to rags. Not that it's too long, but that it's not well kept. She's got huge raccoon eyes going on as though she hasn't slept much in the last week. And I realize that this is a woman that's overwhelmed. That this person is doing a job that needs to be done. I mean, I know at this point that the military has a problem with sexual assault. It's in the news. The Air Force is no different than any of their branches. We certainly had our problems. And it made me curious as to what was going on in this woman's life that she had that outburst. And it made me look around. So I did some homework and I checked into it. It turns out the base I was on, Osan Air Base, had the highest occurrence of sexual assault of any Air Force base in the world. And I would later learn that the reason for that is it's really set up as a perpetrator's paradise. Most people are only there for a year. They still send first-term airmen like me to that base. Say you have young girls away from home for the first time. And the Korean military culture is heavily based on alcohol. There are over 1,000 bars within a mile of base, and every unit has their own bar, and there are practices that encourage excessive drinking among its new members. And the drinking age in Korea is 18. So one of the common things that units would do is called green beaning, and that's where you take somebody new to the unit out to welcome them, and you take them to the bar, and you just keep them drinking soju, the local liquor, until they fall out of their chair. Soju is a really kind of insidious liquor. It's still one of my go-to drinks if I can find it, but it's one of the best mixers in the world. You can't taste it whenever it's mixed with anything, and it's booze that people aren't generally familiar with, so it's very easy to get somebody kind of uninitiated to drink past their limit. Not to mention that most of the people that they're bringing out are 19 to 20 years old and probably don't have much experience drinking. So all of that makes a dream environment for assholes. The perpetrators have a really easy time, really easy targets, and since the average length of tour is only a year or two, there's not enough time for anybody to start to catch on to what somebody's doing. I also learned that the military did not provide extra support for helping the survivors of these sexual assaults. They provided the same support that they provided at every base. A single officer who was the Sexual Assault Response Coordinator, or SARC, and one administrative sergeant. Those are the only two people on the base who have a full-time job helping the survivors. Everyone else involved volunteers as an extra duty, and they become what's called a victim's advocate. My experience previous to this was I have most of the women that have been important to me in my life have survived some kind of trauma caused by a man. Most of the women I had dated at this point were survivors of some kind of sexual assault, and my family has a fairly dark history around women being hurt by men. So I decided that I was going to step up and try to help, and I became a victim's advocate. And to the Air Force's credit and to my Air Force family's credit, there were a lot of us volunteers on Osan. Osan's a really big base. It is a hell of a problem. And a lot of people stepped up and volunteered, and I was one of them. It ended up shaping a lot of who I would become professionally, right? I've made a living and a career now out of providing services to people who are in pain. And this was really the first official step of that. So that initial anger about how that woman blew up at that room showed me a way to do something. And I think that anger can be really useful that way. right? When we get angry, the only thing that anger is good for is stopping something from happening. All anger is for is putting up a boundary. I want this to stop. I wanted to not be called a rapist. I wanted to be in an Air Force where my sisters and brothers in arms weren't worried and fearful of being assaulted. I wanted to be in an Air Force that helped those who have without judgment. And it made me look around at what was going on, and it helped me identify a plan to engage with it. So anger in that moment of time was really useful for me. It led to a powerful career. It led to me helping a number of survivors in and out of the military. And it made me much more aware of a problem that I knew existed, but I didn't understand. So that sounds like anger is really good for me generally, that I'm really good with it. Well, it's not always true. Probably about 9 months into my year-long tour, I had helped a few survivors at this point. I had seen the system at work. And the military system isn't great. It's not any worse, in my opinion, than what I see on a lot of college campuses. We have a national problem with this issue. But being a victim's advocate, I got a pretty good view of how the system goes. The way that the military works is everyone in uniform is a mandatory reporter. That means that any of us in uniform, if a friend of ours comes and says, "Oh my God, someone raped me and I don't know what to do," we are mandated to take that to command and report the instance so that the command can punish and try to punish the rapist. What that ends up doing a lot of times is putting the victim at risk. And there's entire books and other podcasts around how that works. So if you're curious about it, please go find them. I'm not going to get into it too much today, but what my position as a resource that didn't have to report meant that I could help people get the help they needed, recover, and make an informed decision about whether they wanted or needed justice through the system. And I'm sad to say that I, through my 4 years of being a victim's advocate in the Air Force, I only ever had one victim go forward with their story, and it didn't go well. The system for the military has a lot of the same problems that the justice system has on the civilian side, and it's uglier in the military. A lot of times the perpetrators are in the same unit as the survivor is, and it can split a unit down the middle. It ends up becoming a he said, she said moment. It ends up isolating the victim out of the unit. People get angry at them because it impacts the mission. And by the end of my time doing that, I was really burnt out on it. But even at 9 months into my first year of doing it, I felt really impotent. I felt good about being someone that was going to be there and listen and guide people who had survived this horrible act to the resources they needed. But I was angry that there wasn't any justice for them, that I couldn't figure out a way to help these people report and be successful in their reporting. And I didn't realize how much it was festering in me until a person in my unit who was a friend of mine, they were and are part of my Air Force family. They were assaulted. And since I was a victim's advocate, they came to me to talk to me about it so that they could get resources. Now, I was not this person's victim's advocate. The system is designed on bigger bases that your victim's advocate is never from the same unit you serve in for really good reasons. So I got that person to the SARC and got them a victim's advocate and tried to be one of the few friends that they had in the unit that they could talk to. And I knew their perpetrator. I knew the person that raped them. They were in the unit too. and I can't say anything. That's not my choice whether I get to go forward. That's the person who survived its story. That's their decision on how they want to go forward. And by the time I found out, there wasn't evidence left. The survivor had showered. There weren't bruises and beat marks. There was no way that I could see that a case was going to go forward on this perpetrator, even if my friend, an Air Force family member, went forward. And it was just another thing that stuck with me that I wasn't going to be able to fix. And then one night, about 1 a.m, I was coming home back into the barracks where we all hang out. My friend lives in the same barracks as I do, and their perpetrator does not. I've now figured out what barracks he's in to try to sort of keep an eye, I guess. I see the perpetrator walking through our barracks at 1 a.m, and it immediately sends my hackles up, right? I get tense. I get angry that this person is in my dorm, and I want them wondering what the hell they're doing there at 1 a.m. So I hang out in the hallway for a bit. And sure enough, the perpetrator walks back into our hall. So it wasn't just that they were hanging out with somebody else and were on their way home. They were wandering around my barracks at night doing God knows what. I snapped. I got furiously angry. I'm angry thinking about it now that this guy was around and lurking where I slept. I did something really stupid. I stepped out into the middle of the hallway and I got really big and told him to get the F out of my barracks. And he looks at me confused. What the hell's your problem? At this point, I'm looking for an excuse to hurt this guy. And I step up and get in his face and I say, you are going to leave my barracks right the F now, or it's going to get real ugly. And I'm not a threatening guy, right? Like I'm reasonably big. I've got a pretty good bark, and at this point the bark worked. The guy looked a little scared and took off and left the dorm. And after he leaves, I immediately have that adrenaline dump that I think most people are familiar with when you get into an altercation that intense. I get shaky. And I realize that I did something horrible. If that guy hadn't backed down, it would have gotten physical. I wanted it to get physical. I wanted to hurt this guy. I wanted to take out all of my frustration for all of the pain I had seen on him. And if that had happened, it would have ended up in front of the commander. I was a stellar airman. I had done follow-alongs. I got early promotion. People knew me. They would have wanted to know why I had gotten violent with this guy. And they would have started looking, and it would have come out. And I would have outed my friend as a survivor. And it would have hurt them. And I would have lost my job as an advocate. It would have had an impact on my career. And it would have been horribly detrimental to the survivor and friend that a large part of that was about protecting. So, for this story, the lesson is to remember that anger, if it makes you notice something you want stopped, and you just walk back the anger a little bit, it can really be powerful as an insight around what you need. And it can be useful in guiding you to make changes that you want in the world. But unchecked, it can do a lot of damage. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Stories and Lessons. Again, this is Tim with Empowered Change, Counseling and Education. For more information about episodes or what I or our guests are doing out in the world, please visit www.empoweredchangece.com.